All right.
How you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
Awesome.
Welcome to The Harvest, Episode 4. This is a kind of a two-parter, right? This is going to be part 2 of the Underground series. Welcome to Episode 4, where we talk everything cinema and story. And as we grow, you grow. And as we learn, you learn. I'm Xavier Garcia.
Jonathan Garcia.
Cool. So in a previous episode, we talked about Underground.
Right.
And we actually got to explaining how the creation of Underground occurred from the technical perspective. We went through the phases. We ended up going through all the way starting with research and development into pre-production, production, post-production, and the distribution process, primarily focused, however, on film festivals. Mm-hmm. And we thought, great, we should dig a little deeper, though, into the story and talk a little bit about characters and kind of go at it from that perspective so the audience gets an intimate look as to the reasons why we even wanted to tell the story in the first place.
Yeah. When I remember last week, we were talking a little bit about the reasons why, for instance, our protagonist, Thomas, was the way that he was and did the things that he did. A lot of that came from the backstory and understanding some of the stuff that you never probably ever see in a movie, but you don't realize how important it is to understand the decisions that your character makes, why he makes them, and so Thomas was a great one for us. Which our protagonist, the actor's real name is Thomas, which is really interesting.
Yeah, it is. And just to kind of backtrack a little bit, going into like the research and development process before we even casted him as Tommy, because we knew that we were going to shoot this with very specific actors.
Right.
We weren't going to go through the traditional casting process for our leads because we knew who our leads were. We knew who our Margaret character was going to be, and we knew who our Dr. Thomas character was going to be. But something that we felt that was really important before we even got into the casting was getting the actors involved in the creative process and that development process, particularly with the Margaret character. Mm-hmm. We took our team, including the actors, on location scouting.
Right.
Which was something that was rare and unique because you never have that kind of opportunity to spend so much time with your actors. I mean, again, we're talking from a volunteer perspective. Mm-hmm. And because it's a volunteer perspective, and we were doing this as volunteers, we were able to bring our actors, bring our producers, associate producers, our storyboard artists, our first AD, and we went on a scouting hunt, just checking out location after location along with our actors, which gave them a really interesting behind-the-scenes look at the lives that perhaps during the research process, when they're doing it on their own, they would not have had that opportunity.
Right, yeah. That was really awesome. It just like you said, a lot of time actors, they want to go all in and get engrossed into the character. They hide out or they find some sort of location and go all method. But in reality, when you're dealing with an independent film, volunteers, you got to give them the sources, the resources. But it was great because we went into New Bedford. We went into these museums and these sites, and here are these people like just educating you and walking you through and showing you the place and the everything. You instantly felt, smelled, saw. You were in 1850s, and that was like an awakening for them to realize, oh, this is going to be really easy to just morph into these characters.
Yeah, it was great. The opportunity to have been so welcomed and invited into the historical society in New Bedford really helps big time. Mm-hmm. There's a chunk in New Bedford that's specifically focused on preserving that unique history that we actually wanted to make a film about, which was super helpful.
Right.
Because, I mean, they had museums set up in and around the 1850s. They had, there were actual preserved streets, and along the streets, as you walk New Bedford, there are plaques and signage that kind of give you a little bit of history as to like unique and exemplary moments that occurred in that Cross Street, for example, Rose Alley. And like, as you're walking up Rose Alley where we filmed, there's a plaque that talks about, oh, this is why it's named Rose Alley, and this is what happened on Rose Alley. And the actors got an opportunity to walk those streets and dig a little deeper and get some insight, listen to, as you said, to some of the curators at the museum to talk about the history, the Whaling Museum. When we walked in, you said the smells. When we walked in, the first thing that you could smell was oil for like the whale oil, that because they have a huge, in the New Bedford Museum, they have a huge preserved bones of the whale, and it's still dripping oil till this day, and it's from the 1850s. It's wild, and it's dripping oil. And when you walk in, you smell that. And I remember Arissa, who played the Margaret Thomas character, was like, "This, I'm literally now getting research, not just like through the eyes by seeing pictures, but I'm smelling the research. I'm tasting it," because she could like literally taste the oil because it was so pungent.
Right. And the cool thing about it is, we also had another location in Salem where we went into a very rich house, very old, well upkept home. And when you walk in there, as playing a rich character, you can visually see the things that you would have owned. And when you start seeing that, you start thinking about, how you would move around in the space, how you would use those things, and how you would stand and posture, where you would walk. Like, all those things add little things to your character that where you're going in the scene. You know how to move around in the scene because you've seen it. You've seen the way that
comfort.
Exactly.
It becomes, you make it your own. It's you've had an opportunity to not just research it, but to be immersed in it, to live in it, to sit down in the furniture a little bit before you're on set, and you're just like, okay, go. And there are those great actors that can just walk onto a set and just take it in, look around, and then be in the moment. And then there are those that perhaps, need that research phase.
Right. One of the cool things I remember, we walked upstairs to the 3rd floor, and we walked into the servants'
quarters. The servants' quarters.
The servants' quarters up on the 3rd floor, which you would never have today, obviously. Yeah. But when you walked in there, you felt it. You felt the separation. And you were like, wow, I need to be prepared for something like this, because if I'm talking with authority and when the scene happens in the film where you end up seeing the kids, you need to know how to feel in that moment based off the fact that you were able to see it on the 3rd floor.
Yeah. It was awesome for us. I know for a fact that even for me going into this as a director and gaining this knowledge, although it's outside of the scope of what we were filming, it gave me an appreciation for the time, the era, and for what precisely we were filming. And it added little bits of story and perhaps areas that there were maybe some void. And now I want to ask you, I don't know if you noticed from the opposite perspective, because here we're receiving information from them and from these museums and from the curators and from these locations and these homes that are preserved from the 1600s. However, when we rolled up as a group, right, we had, I think, maybe 2 or 3 actors, about 2 or 3 producers with us, the DP, myself, the storyboardist. I mean, we had a pretty solid group.
And that's unique for an independent film, for volunteers.
Well, can you imagine then, I think that talking about it from the independent film perspective and the fact that, mostly very low budget for us, we had made the goal and the effort to be like, okay, we're capping this thing off at $1,200. We said free, but it ended up climbing up to $1,200. Sure. But the opportunity for us to roll so deep into some of these locations gave the neighborhood and the curators and the museum heads an opportunity to see that our group was a professional group,
right?
That we weren't just some kids that were going to come and trash their place, that it was a professional group that was genuinely desiring to understand and wanted to celebrate their city's history along with them.
Right.
And it opened up doors, and it helped us to be able to receive aid and support for free. I mean, they're like, you guys, look at you. Like, we want to help you.
Right. And it stems back to what you said, research. You need to go into these places with your own research so that they can see how much you actually care for, their world. When you're coming in, they'll be like, wow, you're just as interested as I am. Of course, I want to make this movie. I'm going to welcome you in and show you more things that you can't find out there. And so, absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's It's amazing because at the end of the day, they're going to see your passion and your enthusiasm. And based off of your passion and your enthusiasm, as you're presenting yourself as a crew that's coming in, they're going to be very willing to help you. And that goes, obviously, your comportment and how you behave and your professionalism. It's all super important. You go prepared. You bring business cards, maybe even, some of your drawings if you have storyboards and things like that, because we were able to do that. And because we were able to do that, they were like, wow, this is really well thought out. Yeah. This is going to celebrate the history of New Bedford. It's going to celebrate the history of Salem. And a lot of these people, we just went knocking on doors. We literally were like, oh, wow, look at this placard. It says this was built way back in such and such era. Let's knock on doors and see who's inside and see what they're willing to share with us. Right. And, you'd be surprised how willing people are to just offer up information and to offer themselves up as resources. Right. And that's what helped us. Preparation. We talked about that in the previous episode, being prepared, doing your research, doing your homework, which you just brought up, and coming to these places prepared. They were like, okay, I like what these guys are doing.
Right, and a lot of times at the end of the day, you want your film to be completed, you start with preparation.
Yeah.
A lot of preparation confirms your ability to finalize the film.
Yeah.
That's number one. If you just go in there, just run and gun, have your shots that you want to do, you do a little bit of research. I just want to shoot this. I don't need them to say this much. At the end of the day, the percentage of you probably finishing that will be probably none to take you a long time. Only because you come back and you're looking at your content, your editing is like, well, now what do I do? How do I set this thing up? How do I put this thing together? What story do I want to say? That's not the story I cut when I wrote it this way.
Right.
So at the end of the day, research is so important if you want to finish your film.
Yep. And that research allowed us to go into some places and know this looks amazing, but we don't need to film here. Because we were prepared. And sometimes, when you're not prepared, you can be drawn into opposite directions. Because,
and there was so much to be drawn to.
Yeah, it was amazing. We're looking at different places. We're like, we want to film here. We want to film here.
This is awesome.
We want to film here. This is awesome. That's awesome. That's awesome. And they were so open and receptive to be like, please film here. Anybody would have fallen
we had an
into that
opportunity
trap.
to get on a boat, they'll take us on a trip, get on the boat, we'll film this.
Who
doesn't want to film on a boat?
We were like, let's do it, but it had nothing to do with our script. Exactly. And so being prepared allowed us to be on point, to be, on the mark, and to complete the project.
Especially with no budget.
Exactly.
$1,200. That, you have to be precise with your research and development.
The Siemens Bethel. I don't know if you remember the old church, the Siemens Bethel. When we went in, the curator there was like, "Oh, we'll clear out space. Yeah, this is under construction, but don't worry about it. We'll clear up space and we'll film here." But you know what? Even though we knew that wasn't a part, and some of these places and locations weren't a part necessarily for this initial film, which isn't really. It's a 10-minute teaser for a pilot for a series, right? But because we saw all of these locations, we were like, this can be episode 2.
Exactly.
This can be episode 3.
We'll know how to incorporate
episode 4.
A boat episode.
Yeah,
there we go.
And now they've met us. We've made inroads. We're going to show them this well-completed and accomplished initial series, and they're going to be like, this is amazing. Film in my boat. Take my boat out for the night, and let's go out into the sea. And, and this is a legit 1800s boat. Yeah. I can't wait for that episode.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to be amazing.
Yeah, right. No, it's exciting. It's exciting. I really enjoyed the location scouting and the research and helping the characters and the actors really be able to be infused in those worlds and just soak it all in.
Yeah. Oh, and that house was actually the one that you talked about, the Nathan and Polly Johnson house. And we were given the okay to film it, and not. Here's what's amazing. Okay, we were given the okay to film there, right? Even tours aren't able to go into some of the places where they allowed us to go, even private tours. But because, again, the power of just coming prepared and confident, it allowed the curator to see, you guys are doing a good thing. Let me take you into some of these hidden rooms. Let me show you some of these, some of the stuff that no one gets to see.
Who sat here?
Yeah.
This is the person who sat here.
Yeah, he was talking about, this was the actual seat of so-and-so. Like, I can't even remember. Yeah. He was throwing a whole bunch of names, but I know he at one point was like, Frederick Douglass sat in this seat every single morning for church right here. And we're like, this is awesome. This is awesome. Now, let's switch a little bit, and let's talk a little bit about what the research and going to these places how did it affect the script? Because although we were kind of script locked by the time we started doing these searches, we were fluid enough that if we needed to go back and do some touches on the script and on the, we could do that. Well, do you recall any moment where, as a result of seeing something, you were like, oh, let's touch something up just to up
Sure, yeah.
up the
I mean, I
conflict?
remember, for instance, we talked about it a little bit on the last episode, knowing what type of rocking chair was available at the time, whether there was one or not. We seeing one on set was like, okay, they had rocking chairs back in the 1850s, and this is exactly how they look like. Things like that. The lighting, what were they holding? And so there was quite a few things, the wood, the barrels, the fabric, the canvases that revealed the wood underneath. We couldn't
the lanterns and how they held that. Yeah,
there was quite a lot of
little
things that we saw
inspired.
that not only just inspired, but replaced what we had thought was what we needed.
Jose and the whole beard scenario. We were like, okay, slaves would have been shaved. But then after having gone there and having had some deeper experiences and talking to the curators, they were like, well, no, freedmen would have had a nice beard to show their status, that they are free, and
Frederick
they would have
Douglass
dressed well. Which kind of, although we weren't completely ignorant to that, we were still teeter-tottering as to how do we want to present the Abraham character, and that solidified it for us.
But confidence, it's just like you said.
It gave us confidence. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think that there was quite a bit, and even in costuming, what Margaret would have worn, what Thomas would have worn, what Abraham would have worn, and the costuming selection was awesome.
Yeah, Doreen was great. I mean, the costumes in the costume process was fantastic, and I remember going with our actors to just try on different looks, and they were having a blast. It's a fun era. It's a unique era in our history as far as dress and hair is concerned, and it speaks so much to character, which is what I want to jump to next. Our next topic, a little bit about the characters and the individual characters, because dress, as we all know, how we dress dictates the type of person that we are. It's character, even to this day. Even today, when somebody compliments what you're wearing, immediately you're like, oh, why, thank you, because it's almost like a compliment of your character. It's an extension of who you are. The way that we dress in our home is very different than the way we dress at work. A firefighter does not dress like a ballerina to do his job because it dictates certain aspects to what you are doing, so like if you're going into a fire, you need to be equipped and prepared for that. It also talks a little bit about what you do, how you do it, the way you dress, the way that you look. So let's
and even in props too, what prop you're holding, what prop you have as a character. I remember one of the hunters had a shotgun, while the main guy just had a flint gun, revolver flint gun.
Yeah.
And that says obviously two different things. One guy, will go in there and just blast, and one guy, the main guy, only needs one bullet. All I need is one bullet, and that speaks a lot about the character and his preciseness and what he's asking for, what he wants.
Yes. The lead hunter, whom we wanted to characterize as someone whom is calculated. It's like calculated chaos. And in order for us to do that, we were like, oh, he only carries a pistol, because he has calculated the depth, the distance, the shot, the person, all of it, as opposed to the run and gun blasting guy who wants to see the world burn. Yeah.
Exactly. So to answer you, there's quite a bit of things. There's like even the weaponry, the clothing that really changes, and the colors, the greens, the very vibrant colors for Abraham's costume.
Yes,
really was just perfect for his behavior, character, his boldness.
Right. Bold colors to go along with the boldness, because as you know, and I misspoke in the last episode. I think I called it like the Free Fugitive Act, but it's the Fugitive Slave Act. It had been passed in 1850 by Congress, and essentially it was a compromise to to the Compromise of 1850 between the southern slave states and the northern states. And this Fugitive Slave Act essentially made it legal for Southerners whom had runaway slaves to go, aided by the law, and forcibly retrieve back their property. And so we have this character of Abraham who has somewhat of a mysterious backstory. Here he is you know that he's an ex-slave because of how he addresses our lead protagonist, Dr. Thomas. But he has a full beard. He's well dressed, but he's got bold colors. It took a little inspiration from Django, where you've got the Django character, Jamie Foxx, dressed in bold colors to show that he is been freed, and therefore he's going to wear his free nature boldly and clear, right? And so here he had these bold stripes, these red pants, and it spoke a little bit about him, but we didn't go so deep into revealing his character. Now, just from viewing it, just from seeing it, what would you gather from doing a visual study of this character and listening to what he says? What would you gather his backstory is? And then I'll counter it with, what it actually is.
Yeah. So,
where is he? We're starting with Abraham. So
we know he has. He's won his freedom for sure. He is whether he purchased it or whether through war, through fighting, has earned it. He feels comfortable in the North, but at the same time, he knows that there's people who remember him from the South.
There's a threat. There's a constant looming threat in his mind, and he acts that way. He moves that way.
Exactly. Yeah. And when he leaves, one of the lines that Thomas says to him is, stay in the shadows. It's nighttime. He's leaving. He's going out. Why stay in the shadows if he's a free man? Clearly, that there's someone's looking for them, but not only he's trying to save someone connected to him to his past, but also he is trying to not be seen himself. Yeah. So the South is also looking for him as property.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So we don't want to give any spoilers, right? So we don't want to. So I'm trying to dance around the story as much as I possibly can, but still give you a vivid and accurate picture of what's going on in this character's mind, because you nailed it. You nailed it visually as you're seeing him act. You know that although he is free, there is still some sort of a lurking threat. So how really did he get free? Was it legit?
Right.
Was it not legit? And there's a unique bond between his character and our protagonist, Dr. Thomas. There's a very unique bond between them. Here's a white man, a doctor, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, because it's not at all like doctors like today, right? It's not like these six figures, surgeons. It's not that. Mm-hmm. But there's a mutual respect between the two of them, and yet you can see, based on their interactions, that this white doctor is still somewhat above, the character of Abraham. Mm-hmm. But Abraham asserts himself, even to the point where he kind of like calls him out, like, doctor, wake up, like, let's get back to the task type of thing. And, and those that's a bold character move. That's a bold choice that we made, because during this time, the relationships between black and white, even though it was in the North and in Boston, we're still dealing during turbulent times at the passing of this Fugitive Slave Act.
The whole nation.
There's a lot of conflict, and there's conflict even in relationships. It exists today, right?
Right. Yeah, and I want to add to what you were saying. I feel as though Thomas gives way for Abraham to be in that same level. They communicate, they socialize. There's a great friendship, and yet when Margaret comes in,
Margaret, the wife of our protagonist,
that tension, and it's almost like a revelation of like, it's not. Thomas and Abraham still have authority. One is higher than the other. When Margaret comes in, she separates that authority in a way.
Which was a conscious choice that we made as far as so they're all very strong characters.
Right.
All three of them. the character of Dr. William Thomas, of Margaret Thomas, and Abraham, they're all uniquely strong. And although they're all dealing with internal demons, if you will, all three of them assert themselves in a way where you can see that they're like almost like A-type personalities, all three of them, and that there's going to be some conflicts down the road between the three of them because each one has a unique desire. You know, Dr. Thomas has this epiphany. He has this religious experience as a result
of revelation
of,
as well.
Yeah, as a result of some sort of, and the pilot doesn't tell you, but as a result of some sort of traumatic experience, he hears the audible voice of God. And he says, you know, my creator has essentially put me on a path to saving someone. Now, we don't know. It gets revealed at the end of the short, someone. And he's essentially saying, I'm going to put myself at risk. I'm going to put you, my wife, at risk. I'm going to put my family at risk. And we find out that there's something going on in their family, some sort of tragedy, so that it causes even conflict and internal family conflict between husband and wife. Like, you're putting us at risk even after we've experienced this major tragedy in our life. And so there's conflict there. There's conflict between the slave Abraham, or the ex-slave Abraham, and Margaret, because you can see that she has some sort of a prejudice still towards African Americans.
She's trying to hold on to also her identity and her position within the community,
which is something that we don't talk about in the pilot, but we can tell it a little bit as far as backstory.
Yeah, I think it's backstory, which is great. You can see the way that she talks. She cares about her position.
She's a woman of authority.
Yeah, woman of authority.
Where does she get
rich.
such authority?
You know, she has to come and to this warehouse looking for her husband. What is he doing in the night? And clearly, she's not dumb.
Right.
She's very smart.
Something
and
illegal
very challenging.
Is happening.
Where back then, that the man had authority over the woman, but she clearly has, if not equal, more authority because you can see it, money.
Her position of power and finances and financial power, which is interesting. So we allude to the fact that the bonded warehouse where the men are building a hideout, they're building an underground railroad stop inside this bonded warehouse that belongs to his wife, Margaret. And so she's in charge of all of the shipping, the whale business that goes on in New Bedford, the incoming and the outgoing of whale. And the bonded warehouse is her warehouse where all of the stuff that hasn't gone, it's basically customs. It's a modern day customs. And, she keeps there in storage all of the things that haven't yet been registered or could not be paid for. And once, the shippers and the ship captains pay, they can take then their goods back to the final destination, et cetera, and so forth. And so she's a woman of power. She's a woman of authority. And she walks in with that power and the authority to challenge the illegal operation that's going on in her home. But the person doing illegal stuff is her husband, right? And
which clearly you see she loves.
Right.
She really loves her husband, but at the end of the day, she's not going to risk her family.
Yeah.
And I think that is really the key to this episode. That's what I want to call it. Family, because you start to see that when each one of them agree to disagree, it's because in their eyes they see family.
Yeah.
They see the hope for family, the love for family. And that's what brings us through this.
Well, you
episode.
transitioned just perfectly to our next topic, because I want to talk briefly about the themes. And one of the major themes that we have is family. Can you dig a little bit deeper into the theme and the importance of that theme, and the importance personally to you, and how you connect with that theme, and what you wanted to explore, what you as a writer and as a DP, even in how you frame shots, how you want to explore family, relationships.
Well, there's, wow, this is going to bring me back to a lot of things, and I'm going to try to articulate it as best as I can. One of the things that we as a world can relate to is family. I mean, we all have mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, whatever, grandfathers, grandparents, whatever. However, how can we love someone else when we can see it through their own eyes as family? So what I mean by that is, one of the things about Margaret where you see she's so focused on her family. The reason why she doesn't want her husband to do what he's doing is because it threatens their family, both marriage and children.
Yeah.
And until she's able to see it through someone else's eyes, the only way she's able to accept it is because she sees family.
Yeah.
She sees her family within the other family.
Yeah.
And I think that's how it affects me. It affects me because I'm able to relate with stories that are written out there when I see like a father and a son. I have a son and now I have a baby girl. And so now that's a new one for me. And so when I see movies now with a connection with a father and a daughter, that's going to start working in my heart. You know, I relate, I connect, I can feel that, I can understand that. And that's one of the things we wanted to do in that particular theme within Margaret.
Yeah, and the importance of commitment, even through difficult times.
Right.
You know, there's some sort of a tragedy that has occurred in their lives, and what you can see is that that tragedy is somehow causing for a fissure. It's causing for a divide and a separation, and they're heading in different directions. It almost looks, and what we are insinuating, even with this episode, is that there is going to be a divergent path between the two of them, and at some point there's going to be some major event that's going to bring them crashing back together again. But what's interesting is that in this initial episode, she chooses this very powerful woman chooses family over her power and her position, which is something that is near and dear to us, just like what you had just said, like, you know, always choosing family always coming first. That's something that we wanted to just show in this. It was just, it spoke to us uniquely. It was a theme that we wanted to explore. We wanted to explore it through a series of like major conflicts and tragedy, and just show that even in tragedy, one must put family first.
I think another thing that was in the movie, which we talked about with Abraham, boldness, but how each character had their own boldness, but you don't realize till the end, well, part to the end, who's the most bold. Yeah. And I love it because you have these hunters coming out thinking that they're tough, going through the street, you know, looking for Thomas. You know, they have Thomas and Abraham doing this very, you know, bold and courageous thing. You have Margaret being bold and challenging her husband, but then you have those who are sacrificing their lives in the middle of the night underground being the most bold.
Yeah.
And I don't want to reveal it, but you'll know when you watch the movie, you know, the innocence and the real boldness of that innocence.
Yeah, and something that we wanted to be very careful with, you know, and ourselves being minorities, being Latinos, is to not espouse the whole white savior, you know, like, oh, the white man comes in to save the slaves. No, because if you watch carefully with a critical eye, the first thing that you're going to capture is that the real heroes, well, the big hero is Abraham, whom you said it best. Him knowing that he's putting himself at risk goes out into the middle of the night, where there's the threat of these hunters that are chasing after him and what it is that he is protecting. He goes out there nonetheless to do the dirty work, while the doctor stays indoors under the cover of, you know, his bonded warehouse. And so it's, although it may seem one way, if you truly study the film, it's like, oh no, like, they're doing a good job at depicting who the true heroes of this story are, and it was those courageous black men and women, you know, that defied the law of the land in order to uphold the law of God. Right, you know, that all men are created equal in the eyes of God, our Creator, which is the next thing, the whole concept of religion. Now, we included faith in this because faith was very much, well, first and foremost, a major topic.
Huge awakening.
It was a major theme. It was a major motivator for the black slave. A lot of these slaves were, as they were being brought in, were also essentially forced Christianity. You know, they were converted, they were turned, they were taught, and it was,
and a lot of times that's how they were educated to read.
Right, and it was through the Bible that they learned to read and to write. Exactly, and so religion and faith, Christianity in particular, plays a major theme, a major kind of a backstory, if you will, to a lot of these characters. But we put that in particular on the character of Dr. Thomas, whom you have a feeling that he was headed in one very bad direction as far as his faith, or rather in a distancing himself from God in a way,
Right.
perhaps backsliding, if you will, but then has this this major pinnacle awakening moment.
Right,
where
this is his like moral
a Moses
return.
moment, literally like before the burning bush,
Yeah.
where Moses was running away from
Right.
God, running away from responsibilities, and the burning bush ignites before him to commission him to a task that he was not ready for, nor was he looking for. And so faith plays a major role in what ignites the inciting incident for our protagonist, what sets him into action, why he has to do the impossible. Do you care to talk a little bit about just like the concept of faith and how that can play in film and not become a hindrance to the story, but actually become something that supports what the character's motivation?
Well, I don't think any film should ever shy away from history, number one. And during that time, there are multiple awakenings.
Perfect.
Biblical movements, strong preaching, powerful men of God
Awakenings, yeah.
to, tell people about, Jesus and what was happening. And they were so big, out in the open, that you can't shy away from that. Actually take that to influence your world, whether for the good or for the bad. And so for Thomas, William Thomas, you said it best. He had his experience, and almost where he needed some sort of way to redeem himself or change himself. He took his works and put them upon himself to fix his situation at home. And he then says, he heard it from God. Now, whether that's God's full plan,
right,
that's a different story.
Exactly. I'm glad you went there, because we're almost hinting towards the audience that this event can have one of two effects. He can either continue in that Moses-like path where he continues to have fellowship with God and hear the voice as being led, in heart and spirit, or he can go down that other path where this initial major earth-shattering moment leads him on an emotional, self-motivated path to doing something that may seem like the right thing to do, that may seem to our emotions and our natural eyes like the right thing to do, but through unrighteous means. That machine gun preacher, I don't know if you've seen the Gerard Butler film, that machine gun preacher approach where there was an initial desire that was right and righteous, and it came from a right place. Right. But then human nature, human emotion got in the way, and it went down a very unrighteous path. And then what was supposed to be the rescuing of, in Gerard Butler's case in that movie, Sierra Leone child soldiers became the murder, right, and mass murder of warlords.
And I think that is a very challenging question. How far do you go to do something where then it becomes morally wrong?
Right.
And I think that's something that we want to continue with and explore in our future episodes. Yeah. We want to be able to be like, here's this guy. How far
can he go before he can't come back?
And before he can't come back, he's exactly in all of his choices, were they his own or were they the choices that God would want him to do? What did God say during those times? Yeah. How did God speak to his people? I think, there's a movie, we talked about this before, Harriet Tubman just came out. There's no faith principle.
There's few.
Yeah, right. But when it comes to really using
it isn't presented the way that it actually was, in that her literal motivation for every choice that she made, whether a right turn or a left turn, was like on her knees.
Like a Holy Spirit driven direction. And but I think that is great thing to tell because there are people who don't believe in God, and they'll say, look at why are they doing these things and using the name of God? Yeah. Well, we take that challenge and then we put it and give a story behind it and say, this is the motive, and you know what? I agree with you. This is probably an error. Yeah. And we're showing it as an error. As an error. And then we'll say, but this is also how God speaks to people to explain them how good will result out of something that may be bad done by man.
Yeah. And I love it because a lot of the things that we start off with, or that we present here as themes, are things that are both relevant back in the 1800s and relevant today. We're still dealing with slavery today. Human trafficking, sex trafficking. I mean, that is modern day slavery, and
absolutely.
it's sick that that we've come so far and yet are still so far behind. And it speaks a lot to the human condition and the mind of a human being, and how depraved it can be and how low it can go. And one of the reasons why we also wanted to explore this specific time in the 1850s is because it's a great way to make some allegories to today, but have the freedom of story, and have the freedom of hindsight being 20/20, and seeing just like, okay, well, this happened in 2020, today it happened this way, and now with hindsight being 20/20, back then how was it resolved? And we can start to play back and forth with things that are happening today, and looking at how things happened back then, and just it helps us with story.
Yeah, absolutely. You start looking back then, and you realize, the importance of valuing life, and you bring it back today. How does that affect today? Start valuing, not only just my own life, but the life of others, and how I see, all those things.
Yeah.
So
awesome. So cool. It's time for our creators tip of the week.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Do you want me to start?
Yeah, go for it. What do you got?
So for Underground, I want to talk a little bit about what I did, and on the post-production side. A lot of the stuff I did, I was VFX work. A lot of the projects
with him.
With him company, VFX group. And one of the great resources I used, especially during production and then post-production, I use these two channels on YouTube that I'll share. One of them is HUGO'S. HUGO'S is actually really, really good. They teach you about, they have a lot of tutorials about VFX stuff work, and the programs that he uses, the Foundry programs. But 1 or 2 or 3 episodes that he has are really good for VFX supervising on set. Tools that you need, how to set up a scene for VFX production.
More planning and preparation.
Exactly, more planning and
preparation. So that you're not tearing your hair out during post-production.
Huge. You don't want to go back and being like, how am I going to cut this blue screen out or green screen? Oh, I threw a green screen out there, but how am I going to... And all that was humongous. Even the tools to use to get the right green, get the right gray, so that you can be able to do the things that you need with VFX. So, awesome channel. HUGO'S on YouTube.
Cool.
And 2 of the other ones that I use, and the programs that I use, Blender, After Effects, Blender, which is free software.
Awesome.
I've used the Cinema 4Ds. I've used all the other ones. But if this is going to continue being developed, this is developed by us people, and it's only going to get better, and it has become better. And one of the things that I use, one of the channels that I use is Blender Guru, which most people know, and then Gleb Alexandrov. Awesome Blender guys. Andrew Price and Gleb are just awesome Blender guys. They will teach you, awesome tutorials on how to do architecture, how to do lighting. And I was able to go on set, take via HDRIs of, photos of everything, and I was able to bring it all back, take pictures of materials, take pictures of all the things that I needed, so that when I brought it into the program, I had everything that I need to recreate the world.
Extensions were going to be identical to the actual location. Because you had
those are the 3 YouTube channels. There are more, far more, but those are the 3 that, willing to share today.
Cool. All right. I like it. You've got some... You always have some great resources that you're sharing.
Yeah, well, I figured, digging through stuff out there is so hard, and there's so much out there. Good stuff, and then there's also bad stuff. Not so great stuff. So I'm trying to narrow it down for some people.
That's good. So my creator's tip of the week has a little bit to do with, the coronavirus quarantine.
Oh, yeah, we're still in that, aren't we?
We are still in that. And so actually, it's not really a tip as far as a resource. It's more of like, what's really important during this time? Good news. Good news.
Right.
There's so much terrible news. There's so much like gloom and doom out there. Like, God forbid you turn on MSNBC for like 10 minutes. You're going to walk out of there depressed, and some of it is, I don't know how much you can, like, numbers that are coming from China. Like, you can't trust any of that,
right.
And so what I loved was that, and John Krasinski, he isn't the first to do this, but just recently he released the Some Good News Network.
Yeah.
And he isn't the first. There are some other, YouTube channels and YouTubers and other, social media people that are putting stuff out there. But his got me only because I'm such a fan of The Office.
Oh yeah, that's sure.
And it was so nice to see how people are uniting to put together channels or put together Facebook groups or to put together, just apps and resources to share good news, to share, the good that's happening in the world. And that's, again, going back to the concept of faith. Sometimes we ask like, well, where was God during COVID-19? Well, look at all of those moments that impacted individuals of good news. Like that's what gospel means, good news. And so our producer was the audio is cutting in. Our producer is coming in with some behind the scenes info. So absolutely, Alana nails it. Just like what's going on right now has created for just such a pleasant environment where people are connecting, and people are connecting around the concept of good news. But because of John Krasinski's channel, I was able to just kind of see some really cute and really powerful also, and some really good stories of things that are happening out there. And then got to see Steve Carell and the two of them talking back and forth while quarantined. They were able to use technology in order to bring us some laughs. So anyway, my creator's tip of the week is to get plugged into some good news.
Yeah, absolutely.
Get plugged into some good news. And for some of you that want the ultimate good news, there's nothing greater than the gospel. And that's something that I've done, during this time. I've had an opportunity to just like to dig into the Bible and see, just kind of how Jesus dealt with some pretty oppressive times and some some similar circumstances. So it's all great. It's all really great. Just what's happening at this time, where people are just they're sick and tired of the doom and the gloom, and they're saying enough is enough. We're going to share the good of what's happening during this time. Yeah. And so for those of you that are dealing with anxiety or are dealing with depression or just like somehow
overwhelmed,
feeling overwhelmed, and tune into some of these to some good news network.
Yeah, you don't realize how much your soul needs rest and peace and being able to move and just sleep at night, and I think it's very important to be able to do that, to watch that stuff. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, special thanks to our producer, Alana Dispena,
which you heard today.
Yeah, she's coming in loud. I think my earbuds, my headphones died, and so usually I got her in my ear, but now she's heard through this. But thank you for putting together the note for the show. Soon, she's actually going to be posting a copy of the show transcripts and the show notes on our website on mountharvest.com. Right. That hasn't been set up yet. It will be set up really soon. Yep. If you enjoyed what you heard and you want to hear more and want to support us, you can support The Harvest by visiting our Patreon page at patreon.com/The Harvest Podcast.
Yeah.
And for any questions, you can reach me on Twitter at xgarcia.
And Jonathan Harvest.
Cool. And for any longer questions that you may have for us, or any topics that you want to discuss, you can write to us at info@mountharvest.com.
Yeah. Like, share, subscribe.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
And we will be releasing Underground, our short film, the first pilot episode to our series on Patriots Day, April 20th, 2020, on YouTube, on the Mount Harvest YouTube channel for you to enjoy for free. And thank you very much.